Hello ladies and gentlemen, Ascii here for Nerf TV with a look at the latest patch changes to Hearthstone and how they will affect you. So first up, the cost of Unleash the Hounds has been dropped from 4 to 2. Unleash the Hounds was nerfed last patch. Previously it gave all your minions charge and +1 attack. This essentially made for some one-turn kills, which is something Blizzard wants to move the game away from. It was changed to instead summon up a 1/1 hound with charge for every minion your enemy has on the field. However, the cost often prohibited this from being able to be used in combination with other cards. Now at 2 cost, there are some very powerful possible plays. Combined with the Starving Buzzard, you could see some serious card draw, or if coupled with the Starving Hyena, you could end up with a very powerful minion on the field. Some lesser synergies would involve combining the hounds with the Timberwolf for double their damage, or mix it up with either the Cult Master as another way to draw cards, or with the Flesh Eating Ghoul for another way to buff up a minion. Knife Juggler could also be an interesting combo and would start flinging out knives like mad if your enemy had a lot of creatures on the field. This buff was needed and it opened up great possibilities. Perhaps it went too far though, as even at 4 mana I managed to get some big plays out of the hounds with the Buzzard or Hyena, and actually have built a deck which features these combos as a major part. Next up, Pyroblast had its cost up from 8 to 10. About time this happened, combining a mixture of secrets and control, the meta for mages has consisted of just holding the enemy at bay until they can Pyroblast for the win. Blizzard felt this was not a very interactive experience and they wanted mages to have to interact more with their opponent to get a victory. This change was much needed. Delaying that damage by 2 turns is huge and it should make it a lot harder for mages to hold out long enough. Fighting against a mage consisted of trying to rush them down before they could pyro, but with freeze spells and the immune secrets it was damn hard for anything but the fastest of Rushtown decks to manage it. Blood Imp is now a 0/1 down from a 1/1 and had the way its buff works changed. Previously he would buff every minion on your side of the board for +1 HP. As the Blood Imp was in stealth, the ways to remove it from play were quite limited to either AoE or RNG, both of which were fairly limited in the very early game. The result was that the Warlock had a very strong early game presence and Blizzard felt this was a little bit too much. The Blood Imp would throw the map of the game out across their side of the board and make trading efficiently very hard, allowing the Warlock to build up a very strong board presence into the mid game. It was just a matter of time until the Blood Imp was brought into line. It's so strong and useful for its cost. A number of Warlock players have taken to the forums to complain about this change, saying that it goes too far, but let's actually have a look at the math. If the Blood Imp is on the field alone, it does nothing, so no real change there, it didn't really do anything before. With one other minion on the field, it will always buff that minion at the end of the turn for +1 HP, meaning that over time it can potentially do more than it previously could. However, that's assuming that the second minion doesn't die. With 2 or more minions on the field, the Blood Imp starts to get more and more random and its effect becomes less predictable. So essentially what they've nerfed here is decks that play a large number of minions very quickly. Murloc decks being a prime example. With a large number of minions out, the Blood Imp is drastically less effective than it was. However, with just one other minion on the field, it could potentially buff it beyond what it previously could. So a more controlled playstyle with a strong mana curve into the mid game could benefit from this change. The Warsong Commander, one of the Warrior cards, has been reworked and now only gives charge to minions of 3 or less attack, and a second Warrior skill, Charge, has also seen changes. Previously it cost 0 and gave a minion charge, it now costs 3 and gives charge +2 attack. These changes were made to move the Warrior out of the one-turn kill decks we mentioned earlier. These decks work by playing a combo of cards out that allows you to deal massive damage on the turn they're played, even if you started with no cards on the board. These changes limit this drastically. The Warsong Commander changes mean that the big damage minions will not be affected, and adding a cost to the charge means that it can't be used in combination with playing out other big cards at the maximum mana cost. These are fairly nicely done nerfs. While they damage one-turn kill decks, they don't nerf the cards themselves into being completely unusable. Blizzard wants players to have to fight for board control and pace the game out more, and while I would agree with them that that's a more enjoyable experience, I still think the game needs a lot of deck variety to be good. Abusive Sergeant and Dark Iron Dwarf have both seen changes to match them up more. Abusive Sergeant used to give +1 damage to an allied minion until the end of that turn. It's now been changed so that +2 damage can be applied to an enemy minion instead. Main reason for doing something like this would be, for example, to bring a minion's damage up above 4 so it can be hit with a pre-Shadow Word, or upping it enough that the big game hunter could kill it. The Dark Iron Dwarf has also had its effect changed so that the +2 it applies is no longer permanent. This could be considered a nerf, but it does mean that if you want to play the dwarf out with no other friendly minions on the field, you don't have to permanently buff an enemy to do so. So for the dwarf this is quite damaging. Previously it could give you 10 stat points for only 4 costs, which is great value, but without that buff being permanent it's a lot weaker. Other 4-cost cards now outshine it, and it can easily be dropped from quite a few decks. As for the Sergeant, I don't think this will make much of a change. The option to add the +2 to an enemy is nice for the reasons I mentioned, but more often than not it would just be used as it was before. The Defender of Argus has had its damage dropped from 3 to 2. Blizzard's reasoning for this is that they felt it made its way into too many decks as it was such a strong card and such great value. I personally think they went the wrong way about nerfing this. I would have preferred to see the change chaining the buff into a 0-1 in taunt rather than just reducing the damage of the Argus himself. This card won't be going anywhere because of this change, and it seems almost pointless. Novice Engineer has been dropped from a 1-2 to a 1-1. This nerf is huge and I don't really understand why it had to happen. They say the card was included in too many decks so it was changed for the same reasons as Argus, however this card is now essentially useless. There are two 2-cost cards that give card draw, Engineer is one and the 2-1 Looter is the other. The Loot Hoarder draws upon its death rather than upon summoning. The reason for playing the Engineer would be if you're fighting something like a Mage, Rogue or Druid who can use their hero skill to quickly deal 1 damage to you. It means that the minion was slightly harder to remove because that 2 HP helped it stay on the board for an extra turn. Now there's no reason not to just play the Loot Hoarder instead. It's a 2-1 so you have potential for 1 more damage. The only way to stop the card draw effect would be to silence it, and wasting a silence here would be even more useful than getting the card draw. In the early games the silence is used on the Owl, they'd have no follow up for it so you can still get the damage out of the minion anyway. This change will just move everyone towards using the Loot Hoarder instead, so players will still be using the same cards. Lastly, Sylvanas Windrunner has had its cost increased from 5 to 6. It was a great value card at 5 cost and has been a core part of the meta decks for a while. I don't think this change will make much difference, it's a great card and still quite reasonable for the cost. So that's what's coming your way in this latest patch. Most of these changes are quite reasonable, although most of the changes to reduce the amount of cards being used seem to have been done poorly. Giants have also escaped any changes this patch, although they have become quite strong and very popular in the meta. Although the changes to the Warrior charge skills affect the Warrior Giant 1-turn kill decks, the control based Giant decks and the Warlock Unleash the Giant decks still seem very strong. Perhaps we'll have some guides for those soon as they're likely to become quite popular for a while now. As for now though, I've been Ascii and you've been watching Nerf TV. Don't forget to subscribe for more Hearthstone guides, updates and news. Thank you for watching.